This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 39. Problems in Dor and an attempted coup fails. Dor was a port city in the Roman province of Syria, situated on the Mediterranean coast between Ptolemais and Caesarea Maritima. The city occupied a strategic position on the coastal trade route known as the Via Maris, the Way of the Sea. In an act of provocation, a group of young men from that city brought a statue of Caesar into the Jewish synagogue and set it up there. This deeply offended Herod Agrippa, as it violated Mosaic law and threatened the integrity of his nation's customs. Plus, Claudius had just re-established the rights of the Jews throughout the empire, so Agrippa immediately went to Publius Petronius, the Roman governor of Syria, and formally accused the people of Dor. Herod Agrippa also reminded Petronius of the re-established rights of the Jews and how Herod Agrippa himself had advised Claudius on the issue, as we heard in episode 37. Petronius was now equally outraged. He viewed the act as a serious offense against both religious law and imperial policy. Plus, he had just barely resolved a situation like this in Ptolemais. He remembered that Caligula was so upset with him that he had ordered him to commit suicide. But luckily for him, that order came after Caligula himself was assassinated. The last thing he needed was another situation like that, but with the new emperor Claudius and his personal friend Herod Agrippa. So Petronius wrote the following letter, and I'll include the citation in the show notes. Publius Petronius, governor under Emperor Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, issues the following decree to the magistrates of Dor. Some among you, whether out of boldness or sheer madness, have defied the emperor's edict, which explicitly allows the Jews to follow their own laws. Instead, you have acted in direct opposition by placing Caesar's statue in a synagogue, thereby preventing the Jews from gathering there. This has offended not only the Jewish community, but also the emperor himself. His statue belongs in his own temple, not in a foreign place of worship. It is a basic principle of justice that every group should have control over its sacred spaces, as the emperor himself has affirmed. His edict grants the Jews the right to practice their customs and enjoy equal citizenship alongside the Greeks. Therefore, I order Proculus Vitellius, the centurion, to bring before me those responsible for this offense. Even the leading men among you are outraged and claim that the act was carried out by an unruly crowd and not with their approval. So I urge your chief magistrates, if you do not wish to be seen as complicit, identify the offenders to the centurion. Take care that this incident does not spark further unrest. Those who support such actions seem intent on stirring up conflict. Both King Agrippa, whom I greatly respect, and I are committed to ensuring that the Jewish people are not provoked into gathering in protest or becoming disorderly. To make the emperor's position clear, I have attached the edicts recently published in Alexandria. Though they are widely known, King Agrippa read them aloud before my tribunal to argue that the Jews must not be deprived of the rights granted to them by Augustus. I therefore command that from now on, no one seek to incite sedition or disturbance. Let every person be free to follow their own religious traditions. So in this way, Petronius handled the matter and ensured that it did not escalate. Herod Agrippa knew how to wield power in this politically and religiously fraught environment. As a new year began, the imperial household could reflect on what had been achieved and what was still to come. As part of the precarious and tacit agreement that he had reached with the Senate in the months before that followed his own seizure of power, Claudius had been careful to leave the incumbent consuls in place until the end of their tenures. He waited until January 1st, the beginning of the traditional Republican consular term, to assume the office himself. This was his second consulship, his first as emperor. Claudius recalled to himself that years earlier, in 14, when he had sought the consulship, he was turned away by Tiberius himself. His first consulship had come due to Gaius, his nephew, in 37, but that was essentially because of a whim on the part of the princeps. Messalina would certainly have been impressed as she married Claudius when he had not been expected to amount to anything. Now she, too, as a member of the imperial family, was proud at what had been accomplished. In an act of familial respect, Claudius also ensured that, on what would have been her wedding anniversary, January 17th, the now-deceased Livia was deified and acknowledged as Augusta. Claudius now permitted Gaius Calpurnius Piso, the flamboyant and fabulously wealthy bon vivant, to return to Rome after years in exile. His fall from favor had been sensational. As we noted in episode 26, Caligula had become infatuated with Piso's wife, Livia Aristilla, forcing Piso to divorce her so the emperor could claim her for himself. The marriage, however, lasted scarcely a day. Caligula quickly lost interest, and in a final act he forbade Piso and Livia from remarrying, and he banished them both. Livia died in exile, but Piso lived to see Rome again, and he wasted no time reclaiming his place in its vibrant social world. Once back, Piso rekindled his friendship with Domitius Silus, but this reunion soon took a scandalous turn. Piso became captivated by Silus's striking wife, Atria Gallia. Though she lacked noble pedigree, she did possess the allure that Piso could not resist. In a move that echoed the very drama that had once destroyed his own marriage, Piso seduced her away from her husband. The two were soon married, sealing a union born of charm, ambition, and more than a hint of irony. Lucius Arruntius Camillus Scribonianus was a well-respected Roman senator, especially active during the reign of Tiberius. Together with Gnaeus Ahenobarbus, the now-deceased husband of Agrippa, he served as consul in 32 after the execution of Sejanus. He was also the brother of Livia Medellina Camilla, Claudius's second wife, the one who died on their wedding day, as we heard in episode 6. Scribonianus was one of those who had been considered by the Senate to be a replacement for Gaius after he was assassinated. But deliberations took so long that Claudius effectively wrapped up the position before the Senate could act, as we heard in episode 36. Only about a year after Claudius came to the throne, Scribonianus governed Dalmatia, when Lucius Annius Vinicianus, one of the men the Senate had once seriously considered as a potential princeps after Caligula's assassination, approached him with a proposal: join a coup. Vinicianus was no stranger to such schemes. He had already played a role in the conspiracy with Cassius Dio that brought about Caligula's death. Like Scribonianus, he too had briefly stood among the Senate's possible successors until their deliberations were cut short by the Praetorian Guard's decisive pledge of loyalty to Claudius. Like Vinicianus, Scribonianus certainly had a low opinion of the sniffling and maladept Claudius. He talked over the matter with his wife. He thought that Claudius might quickly abdicate based on mere threats. No military action would even be necessary for this coup. Scribonianus mustered his troops in a way that would attract attention, and Claudius soon learned of it. The princeps did in fact ask his trusted advisers if he should simply abdicate, for this news meant his certain demise. But Claudius was met with a resounding no. Thus emboldened, Claudius prepared for the worst. But in Dalmatia, after Scribonianus had mustered his troops, they were not able to secure the standards. Taking this as an omen from the gods, the soldiers, made up mostly of auxiliary units rather than professional Roman military men, lost their courage. The revolt was over in 5 days, and both Vinicianus and Scribonianus killed themselves. Claudius was rightfully nervous given this failed revolt, and so he continued with a purge, including that of the Roman senator Caecina Paetus, whose wife Arria was on good terms with Messalina. They were in Illyricum, and they had been part of the planned coup. So he was arrested and brought to Rome for trial, but the soldiers would not allow Arria to accompany her husband. So instead, she hired a fishing boat and followed along as best she could. At the trial, Scribonianus's wife was testifying about the plot against Claudius when Arria said aloud, "What, shall I listen to you, in whose bosom Scribonianus was killed, and yet you still live?" Ariana knew that a death sentence awaited her, but she faced it with steadfastness. Both she and her husband were convicted and sentenced to death by suicide. Paetus could not muster the courage to commit the act, when Arria took the sword, pierced herself with it, and said to him, "Look, Paetus, it doesn't hurt." Her words and actions became legendary. Claudius's niece, Agrippina, had already left with her husband Passienus to serve at his post as proconsul of Asia. Otherwise, she might have fallen under suspicion too. Next time, we'll hear more about how Messalina continued to increase her power and how Herod Agrippa managed his kingdom.